The foundation of my first company, For Antibody, which, as I said, I've started as a spin-off from my academic research group at the University of Basel, was more or less serendipity. Previously, I was researcher at the Basel Institute for Immunology, very much focused on an academic career, but all of a sudden that institute was closed. And I was faced with the question, well, what do I do? So after I had to leave that institute when the doors closed, I transferred my research group to the University of Basel, but had already the idea to potentially start a company. Because during the time when I was doing research at the Basel Institute, I, of course, already followed a lot of biotech companies that emerged in the United States. And many of the investors who invested in these companies actually involved myself and people from my research group in scientific due diligence. So we saw that actually the transition from research to a commercial company, to building a biotech company, is not a huge leap. On the other hand, there's always a little bit of a challenge to get out of your comfort zone when you are having your research grants, you're building your research group, and everything is really geared up towards an academic career. And I think in this context, it was very important that I had the chance to attend a new program that was offered by the Gebhard Rüff Foundation, which was called New Entrepreneurs in Technology and Science. And as part of that program, actually, we did a field trip in the United States. We visited US-based startup companies in the Boston area. We actually went to a business school where we got a crash course into how to start up a business, and we discussed a few case studies. And that, I think, was the catalyst for me to say, well, after there was a little bit of a kink in my academic career, but already thinking about potentially translating my research into a commercial entity, well, this was the catalyst, this program, and then actually seeing the motivation and the just do it attitude of US-based entrepreneurs that we can do this here in Switzerland as well. The step out of the academia is really not easy, but I have to say there was a second catalyst that helped me tremendously to make this leap out of academia and into a biotech environment and in starting my first company. And this was actually my professor, the department head. I opened up to him and I said, Ton, it's very difficult for me to do the research at the same time as attracting investors to a new business idea. And it was quite amazing that he actually mentioned to me, look, if you want to try this, I can stop your employment contract for a year. If it works, then you're off to go. You start your company. If it doesn't work out, you come back on your original academic employment contract. So that was an absolutely altruistic support that I've never experienced from anyone else before. And I think that was the second big catalyst, that I had the full support. And in addition, he said, look, here's a telephone. You can use that as a telephone for the new company. And this is how I then started, in a very small office at the Pharma Center of the University of Basel, incorporated a company with the address of the university. And from there, a career of more than 20 years of building companies in biotech and for cancer patients has started. If you are an academic researcher and you start your first company, I think it's very important that you have a mentor who, well, has a lot of credibility, scientific credibility, who also has maybe a larger network than yourself and who can open a lot of doors. How to work with a mentor like this is actually not so easy, because on one hand, I mean, there's always the risk that the mentor takes too much influence on your way of doing things and your decisions. And on the other hand, well, there could be a situation that you're not taking enough of the good advice. So you have to find the balance between, well, not being overpowered by the opinions and the advice of the mentor, but not kind of neglecting the advice that you're receiving. Because usually, I mean, mentors, well, have their experiences. They're usually a little bit older. have a bigger network. So yeah, listen, but find your own way is the advice that I would give in working with a mentor. But again, no 100% foolproof recipe here. First of all, I think if you have been somewhat successful in academia, if you had a good thesis, if you had a good postdoc, you have already proven that you can create value in terms of scientific value, and that you can potentially, lead people, or because you usually, if you have done a postdoc, you have responsibility for certain diploma students, for master students. So the people skills, the organization skills, but also to kind of, follow your ideas and be persistent. Because in science, you also need to be persistent in order to be successful. And this, I think, is an aspect that you need in creating companies as well. So you need to be convinced that it's worthwhile pursuing your vision and your dreams, and that you can actually plan this out and that you can take people along this journey. Of course, in a commercial setting, there is much less time until you need to deliver something than in the academic setting. Very often in academia, you get research grants that give you kind of a 5 to 6 year time frame to develop something meaningful. But in a commercial setting, you cannot do free academic research where you don't know what the outcome is. So you have to have a little bit of a plan and an execution plan with defined milestones, with a defined goal where you know if you organize that correctly, you can reach it. So it's less of a research into the blue. Of course, big pharma companies, they have their blue sky groups and they have their research groups as well. But at a startup company, you don't have the luxury of blue sky research. You really have to do applied research, and you have to execute on an idea and deliver certain results in a short period of time. Other than in the academic setting, where your salary is paid by the university or maybe by the department, your salary in a biotech setting is paid from the investors' money that you potentially pull in. And this will run out and will not be renewed if you're not delivering results. And there's maybe another aspect, which is that you have to have the ability to build a company in a way that you can actually manage the growth. So in addition to kind of the research expertise, you have to have the ability, to manage processes so that you can leverage the funding, the financial resources that you get from investors in the best way possible. It's a saying, cash is king. So if you're running out of cash, this would be the end of the company. So you always have to operationally plan that you have results in a short period of time that brings you to a certain value inflection point, on which basis you can either raise additional money or, in the ideal world, to sell whatever the result is and to get revenue into the company, which of course is something that in a startup environment is quite unusual in the first couple of years. So very often you depend on investors' funding and investors' money. The skills for managing a startup company, I have to say, I didn't suck it up with my mother's milk. So I think I really had to learn it a little bit more the hard way, and doing it, learning by doing, essentially. But also, of course, listening to a lot of mentors and experts in the field. And as I mentioned, attending courses where people who had experience in starting companies told me about their experience, about what for them is important and not important. While I was actually building my first company ForAntibody, and we had reached already a size of 30, 40 people at the time, I actually went back to school and attended an entrepreneur school at the Hochschule St. Gallen at the HSG. This was the entrepreneur school of Henri B. Meyer, who, by the way, was the former financial officer of Roche. So he created this diploma in technology entrepreneurship that I attended. So I added skills, business skills, and in particular, well, abilities how to lead people, how to motivate people, how to manage a company, and position it for growth. So I think this module was very important for me. So I have now a diploma in technology entrepreneurship, but this is less important. It's really important that I learned from a lot of people during this course who actually started their company successfully and taught us or shared their insights and shared their experiences. We also created a network of, co-fellow students who attended this course, many of them being entrepreneurs and startup entrepreneurs themselves, that I'm still very much in contact with. And in fact, one of the private investors in my second and my third company came from that studies at the Hochschule St. Gallen. That helped me a lot in acquiring certain skills that you don't have when you're only concerned with academic research. It is actually helpful at some point of time to have a little bit of a theoretical drill in kind of best business practice, in certain hard skills that you need for, let's say, finance, administration. In academia, I think there are not so many processes that you encounter as a scientist because, I mean, the people are employed at the university, so there's a whole human resource department behind that. So you're just worried that, I mean, the people can get paid and then you give them a project and you let them run. In a company, you need more processes in order that everyone goes forward in a coordinated fashion. And that also means that as a manager, you have to have certain tools to monitor whether the development is going into the right direction or if everyone goes into a different direction. That was the biggest learning that I had from my diploma studies in technology entrepreneurship from the Henri B. Meyer Entrepreneur School in St. Gallen, that they actually taught me about certain management processes and how to steer a company and actually having the levers in place, which they call the management cockpit, that you can actually, steer a company left or right or straight, rather than that everyone runs into a different direction and you don't have control about the direction of the company. So I think that is something that is not easily done by learning, by doing. I think it needs a little bit guidance of a business school. And then also you can relate the theoretical concepts a little bit more easily because you're already in the process. And then it's almost an eye-opener that you then see, oh yeah, I've experienced that issue and I could have, if I had known about the solution, the theoretical one before, it would have been helpful. I think I never regretted it to make that transition from academia into entrepreneurship. Everything goes much, much faster. And this is what I appreciate in being an entrepreneur, that the feedback, the reward is all much immediate and much faster than what you experience in academic research. Also, it's much more direct. So you're speaking to your business partners, you're speaking to the investors. They tell you right into your face what they think, ideally, and whether they like or dislike any kind of plan that you present to them. In academic research, interestingly, I mean, you always wonder, well, who wrote this nasty review on your manuscript that you've submitted? Who could be, I mean, your competitor who's trying to torpedo your research? So it's all a little bit more secret. You also don't know who is reviewing your research grants that you apply for. So in a way, it's not so direct. I don't want to qualify this as negative. I think this is an important aspect, of course, that the peer review of your research, the peer review of the research grants that you apply for in academic research is more of a discrete process and a secret process. But I do like the direct feedback, the direct interaction with the stakeholders in an industry setting. The direct feedback that you get from investors, from your board members, also from your employees, if you're doing something wrong or if you're doing something right. If you simply follow the advice of others, either consultants or mentors, without making your own judgment call on it, I think then you will just follow others and you're not following your own strategy and your own way of doing things. I think each entrepreneur has, her or his own style, his own way of doing things. part of that needs to be preserved during the journey of building companies, because otherwise you're not authentic. And people will never believe you, and they will very quickly see through you if you're simply following what other people have put into your mouth. Everything that's useful, you integrate. Everything that you don't find useful, you discard. And this is what I said, you distill out, well, what is best for your own endeavor and your own project. There's never a right or wrong. You have to adopt the advice that you think is right in your context, according to your own view. And then you go forward, and then you test. I think there's one aspect that I believe is important for making the leap from getting out of academic research and starting your own company. I think you have to do it wholeheartedly and with all of your energy. So if you keep one leg in academia, if you are not committing yourself fully to the new project, I think there will always be skepticism by stakeholders in the new project, be it investors, be it co-founders, be it other stakeholders, whether you really are serious about it. And then people will be hesitant to support this. They will be hesitant to contribute, to participate, to finance that endeavor. I think you have to make that step and go 100% into the new endeavor. Because if you don't do it, then you have no skin in the game, or less skin in the game. And then people will always say, well, I mean, he's not serious about it. You have to leave something behind, and you have to start something new. Sometimes, of course, you have the luxury to take some colleagues along with you on that journey. I mean, this is, of course, then ideal. And this, of course, is something that, is extremely important to have a team that then goes forward in this new project. But one person, at least one person, has to be fully devoted to this project and has to put, all eggs in one basket, essentially, and fully commit him or herself to the project, because otherwise you will not be credible to whoever you want to convince to invest in your project. Well, I come from a family where, my father had created companies more in a normal kind of business, not in science at all. So he was creating printing companies. So they were printing magazines, journals, newspapers. So a totally different kind of business. So I was always kind of, in an entrepreneur environment back from my family. My wife also comes from an entrepreneur family. So her family always worked very hard in building their business, a transportation logistics business, where they had trucks driving around in Europe, delivering goods from A to B. So both myself and my wife were used to, from the parents and parents-in-law perspective, on working for their own businesses and working extremely hard, and also, not always having weekends, but needing to work also on Saturdays and Sundays if it was necessary. So there was already an attitude there that, doing business is something that can be done, that requires a lot of effort and work and dedication, but it's not something out of the world. But then being a scientist, and I said, this is where, I see a parallel between science and starting and running businesses, is the persistence in following through your ideas and bringing them to a certain value inflection point, or kind of bringing them to a certain result. So also when you are a researcher, you not always drop your tools, your pipettes, your microscope on a Friday afternoon, but you continue to work on Saturdays and Sundays as well. So in that sense, I think I always had the feeling, if I just work hard enough, I will make it. Because I've seen that in the past with the parents-in-law, although it was very hard and with lots of competition and changing economic environments, small businesses can sometimes be hit very hard, so that you have to kind of downsize companies. This is very stressful. Then, of course, we've experienced that in our families. that this affects also family life, because then in these periods, usually you work even harder as an owner of your own company. Even if I said I haven't sucked up with a mother's milk how to manage a company, at least I've seen privately, that my family always has been working more in an entrepreneur setting or in a company owner setting. And then combining this with being a researcher, where you also have to be persistent, I think that convinced me that if I work very hard, I can make it. The memory that I have from my childhood or when I was going to school was that I mostly experienced that the parents, went through times of hardship where the business was not going very well, and they had to work very long hours and on weekends and very hard, maybe had to my father had to sell a company at a very, let's say, unfavorable terms, and then built the next company. It was not that we could live of these companies very luxuriously. Maybe subliminally, this told me maybe I can do it better with a kind of a scientific background that I had. And none of my family members actually had an academic degree. So I'm the first lucky child who actually went to university and got an academic degree. Maybe that subliminally kind of brought me to starting my own company when, there was an opportunity after the Basel Institute was closed, and we had to think about what to do next. Well, what has surprised me starting my company and moving out of academia was the support that I've experienced from so many people along the way. This is from co-founders, from mentors, from board members, from scientific advisors, also from the family. So my wife also was extremely supportive and never demanded that I'm back for dinner at 6:00 p.m. or that I have to be, there for the family on a Saturday or Sunday. So if the business demanded, there was always the support that I could put the business very high in the priority of family life. Of course, now that, I've started my third company and I've been in building companies or managing companies for more than 20 years, I think family has a very high priority these days after they have suffered so much in the early days. But I think there was always a support from the family. But as I mentioned, also support from so many people, and this also includes the Gebert Rüff Foundation, or certain foundations who kind of, sponsored education programs, training, business training. There was an incredible amount of support by people where I didn't expect it. And I always try to give back that support. So it's not only receiving, and this is why I'm now doing a lot of mentoring. I'm supporting other startup companies. I'm on the board of a Basel-based spin-off company. Also the teaching that I'm doing at the university in Lugano, the biobusiness course, is something where I would like to share my experience and to give back to the community. And hopefully out of this, new companies are created from other successful entrepreneurs. And hopefully they take some of my advice, but not all, to make their companies successful as well.